What I'll be showing you in the next 10 minutes is a demonstration of the distributed system that was developed within EHR4CR to support the protocol feasibility scenario. And so what will happen in this demonstration is that I'm going to be building within a feasibility study, I'll be building a query consisting of a number of eligibility criteria. I'll be distributing that query to a number of sites I'll be selecting from the platform registry, and once these queries have been executed locally at each of the selected sites, I'll be showing the results coming back from those sites, and I'll be showing how I can make further changes to my query in order to see how certain criteria or certain threshold values in my criteria will be influencing my patient count that I get back. You'll see me switching a couple of times between the central workbench, which is used at the sponsor site, so either by a pharma company or a CRO, for the protocol design for the feasibility conduct. And I'll be switching sometimes to the tools that I'll use at each of the clinical sites for administration of the protocol feasibility query system. So without much further ado, let's go over to the demonstration. So here we go. What you're seeing here is the login screen for the study workbench used by the sponsor to manage feasibility studies and the underlying queries that are being created for those. So what you see after login on this dashboard is you'll be able to see a listing of the sites currently connected to the platform ready to accept queries. You'll see also recent activity, and of course you'll be able to do the typical things you can do with such a system, such as managing your account, managing your user group, the group of users working in the same group on the same study, for instance. And what I'm showing here is the creation of a feasibility study. So in the listing you see below, we have a list of currently defined studies. I've just created a new study, and when I click the link to it, I'll be taken over to the dashboard for that study, on which I'll be able to see which members of my team are currently assigned on that study, meaning that they can do certain operations on that study. Of course, you're able also to manage the study metadata as well as the access rights that are granted to each of the study managers to work on this feasibility study. As this is a new study, we don't have any available queries yet, so let's create one. And so when we create this first query, it will initially be in version 0, meaning that it hasn't been edited yet. And you'll see later that I'll be able to create new versions of that query, and I can work at any point in time on any of the versions that I have been working on before. So now that we have our first query, let's select it and go over to the interface called the Query Builder, which allows me to formulate my eligibility criteria in the form of inclusion and exclusion criteria. And each of these inclusion and exclusion criteria are composed of a number of Boolean and temporal constraints, and so you're able to combine certain selection criteria and connect them through Boolean logic or through temporal relations between those constraints. So the first criterion I just made is I'm looking for patients at least 18 years old. So I just drag the concept I'm using and I drop it on the pane. Let's go over to a second criterion, and this one is I'm looking for patients diagnosed with non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. So on the left side, you'll see a tree of terms that is being served by a central terminology service on the platform, and I'm able to browse through that reference terminology. And so in this case, for diagnosis, I have to go to the diagnosis subtree and select the criterion, the concept I'm interested in. Another inclusion criterion I'll be having right now is I'm looking for overweight and obese patients, meaning that the BMI, the body mass index of the patient, should be more than 25 kilograms per square meter. and it should be, another inclusion, it should be below 40 to exclude non-morbidly obese patients. So again, using this dialogue with selecting the cutoff values. And now we'll go over to a new inclusion criterion, and this time I'll be looking for lab values. I'm interested in hemoglobin values, and I want to include patients which have a A1C level above 7.5%. So when I drop this on the pane, I have to specify again the threshold value, and specify whether I'm interested in the first of the or the last entry in the data source regarding this criterion. You'll see that happening every time, and sometimes you'll be interested in the first occurrence and sometimes in the last occurrence. Let's add some exclusion criteria now. So an exclusion criterion in this case would be to exclude patients diagnosed with acute myocardial infarction. And a final exclusion criterion that we're going to be added will incorporate a temporal constraint this time. I'm only interested in, I want to exclude patients that have been treated with insulin or analogs in the past 12 months. So what I do is I drop the temporal constraint before now and set it to 12 months, meaning that I will be looking at the last 12 months that occurred before now. And when I go back to the tree with my concepts, when I go to the medication category, I'll be looking for insulin and analogs, and I'll be dropping that in the placeholder that you see on the right, which will effectively mean that I'm only retaining, for this exclusion criterion patients matching within the 12 last months. This time I've selected last because since I'm interested in the last 12 months, I have to select the last occurrence of this criterion. What you see now on this screen is now that I'm happy with my query. You can see the query in human readable form, which is a form which can be used by clinicians to share query information on queries you're working on. Now we're going over to the clinical sites, and here I'm showing you a number of tools that are used locally to manage the query endpoints. So what you just saw was a tool to allow mapping of reference terms that are used in the central platform to map them to the local terms, whatever local terms are used in my query endpoints. There is also a number of other tools that allow me to configure how my query endpoint will be connecting to my clinical data warehouse. I can do a number of local study management actions. I can configure the mapping of the query constructs to the concepts in my local clinical data warehouse. And finally, I can configure my endpoints to be ready to accept incoming queries. So now that everything is properly set up, we'll go back to the central workbench, and what you see here is I'm selecting a number of sites to which I'm going to be sending my query that I have just saved. So what you see here is this query has been saved and distributed to the endpoints that are specified here in the interface. I already received results from one endpoint, so let's go over to that particular site, and let's have a look in the other trail locally to see whether we can find this query that has just been executed. So when we look at this latest entry, this is the one that has just been sent, and when I select it, I'm able to look into the further details, meaning that I can see the actual query that was sent to this endpoint, but also the authentication information referring to the end user executing this query, as well as the number of database queries that have been executed on my clinical data warehouse, as well as the results that have been communicated back to the central workbench tool. So let's go back to that central workbench, and now that we have results back from all endpoints, let's have a look at the results. So when we look at the results, we'll be able to see an aggregated overview as well as an individual overview per site, per responding sites. And for each of the criteria I have specified in my query, I'll see a breakdown according to age and gender categories, showing me how each of the individual criteria is influencing the number of patients that match these criteria. So I'll be seeing for each of these criteria in isolation what the effect is of this criterion, as well as the global effect by returning me the combined results of all criteria taken into consideration at the same time. So now that I have my results back, and you can see I have a high number of results for each of the sites, let's go back to the query and modify one of the parameters and send the query again and see how that influences the resulting counts from that modified query. So in this case, I'll be changing the cutoff value for the hemoglobin A1C count, and I'll be looking for patients having a value above 10%. So now that I changed my query, I'll be saving it again, and I'll be running the query again selecting the same endpoints as I did before, and I'll be submitting that query, that modified query again, and I should be able to see how that change has influenced my my matching cohort of patients. While we're waiting for responses, we'll have a look at the version of our query, and you can see it's currently on version 2 because I have just made a modification. And this tool also keeps track of all versions of queries, meaning that I can, at any point in time, I can further work on any of the query versions I have worked on before, meaning that I have a complete backlog of every action I've been doing before. Now that we already have one result and we're waiting for the others, let's go back to the results and have a look. And you'll see now that I've changed this criterion, I only have one matching patient where I had multiple patients before.